The moment began quietly, almost casually, but it carried the weight of an entire war. In the late summer of 1944, after weeks of brutal fighting across France, one American general paused and asked a question that would echo through military history. It was a simple question, asked without drama, yet loaded with confidence, tension, and risk. He wanted to know if he should give something back. What he was talking about was not land in a normal sense. It was momentum. It was initiative. It was the future direction of the Allied advance in Europe. And when Dwight D. Eisenhower heard that question, he understood exactly what it meant. What Eisenhower said next would shape the rest of the campaign in Western Europe. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. To understand why that question mattered so much, we need to go back to the summer of 1944, to a continent torn apart by war, and to two very different American generals whose paths had crossed many times before. One was calm, controlled, and political by nature. The other was aggressive, restless, and driven by instinct. Their relationship was built on trust, frustration, admiration, and fear of what might happen if things went too far. By August 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy was no longer a fragile gamble. It had become a rolling force that the German army was struggling to stop. The beaches of June were now far behind. Paris was trembling. German units were retreating, surrendering, or being destroyed. The Allied command faced a new problem, one they had not fully expected so soon. They were advancing faster than their supply lines could support. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and food were running dangerously low. Every decision now had consequences that could affect the entire front. At the center of this problem stood General George S. Patton, commander of the United States Third Army. Patton had been unleashed after the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944, following Operation Cobra. Once free from the hedgerows, his army moved like nothing the Germans had seen before. Tanks raced across open country. Infantry followed in trucks instead of on foot. Bridges were seized before they could be destroyed. Towns fell with barely a fight. Patton's advance was so fast that maps became outdated within days. By early August, Patton's Third Army was pushing east and south through Brittany and central France. Cities like Le Mans fell quickly. German resistance crumbled under the pressure. Prisoners were taken by the thousands. For Patton, this was the kind of war he had trained for his entire life. Movement, speed, shock. He believed deeply that wars were won by relentless attack, by never letting the enemy breathe. But speed creates problems. Every mile, Patton advanced stretched the Allied supply system further. The ports of northern France were still in German hands. Supplies had to come over the Normandy beaches or through the damaged port of Cherbourg. Trucks ran day and night in what became known as the Red Ball Express. But even that massive effort could not fully keep up. By mid-August 1944, fuel became the critical issue. Tanks without fuel were useless. Trucks without fuel stopped. Artillery could not move. Patton's spearheads were reaching the limits of what they could sustain. Yet from Patton's perspective, the German army was on the edge of collapse. He believed that one more strong push could break them completely, possibly ending the war in the West before the end of the year. At the top of the Allied command stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Eisenhower's job was not just to win battles, but to manage an alliance. British, American, Canadian, and Free French forces all depended on his decisions. He had to balance personalities as much as divisions. He had to think in terms of weeks and months, not just the next day. Eisenhower favored a broad front strategy. Instead of concentrating all strength in one place, he wanted all Allied armies advancing together across a wide front. This approach reduced the risk of a single disaster and kept constant pressure on the Germans. It also fit the political reality of keeping all Allied nations engaged and contributing. Patton, on the other hand, believed in concentration and exploitation. He wanted fuel, supplies and freedom to drive deep into Germany, cutting off enemy forces and causing chaos in the rear. To him, slowing down was the real danger. Every pause gave the Germans time to regroup. These two views clashed repeatedly during the summer of 1944, though usually behind closed doors. Eisenhower respected Patton's results, but worried about his judgment. Patton admired Eisenhower's authority, but disliked restraint. Still, both men understood that they needed each other. The specific moment when Patton asked if he should give it back came during a critical supply crisis in late August 1944. By that time, the Allied armies were spread across France. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's British and Canadian forces were advancing in the north toward Belgium. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's American First Army was pushing east. Patton's Third Army was swinging wide to the south and east, threatening the German border. Fuel shortages forced Eisenhower to make hard choices. He could not support every advance at full speed. He had to decide where limited supplies would go. Montgomery argued for a concentrated push in the north, eventually leading to Operation Market Garden. Patton argued that his army was already deep and moving fast, and that stopping him now would waste a rare opportunity. As supplies tightened, Eisenhower ordered that fuel be diverted from Patton to support other armies. This decision slowed the Third Army dramatically. Patton was furious, though he kept his tone controlled in official messages. He believed the Germans in front of him were beaten, and that stopping now would allow them to form new defensive lines. It was during this pause, sometime in late August, as Patton's forward unit sat idle for lack of fuel near the Moselle River in eastern France, that Patton reached out to Eisenhower. The exact words have been repeated and reshaped over time, but the meaning is clear. Patton essentially asked if Eisenhower wanted him to give back the ground he had taken. It was not sarcasm. It was a blunt way of pointing out that stopping an advance in enemy territory carried risks. The question carried layers of meaning. Patton was reminding Eisenhower that land gained at high cost could be lost if momentum disappeared. He was also challenging Eisenhower to reconsider his priorities. And finally, he was expressing frustration in the only way he knew how, through a sharp, almost provocative statement. Eisenhower's response did not come in the form of anger or rebuke. Eisenhower understood Patton's personality. He also understood the reality of the situation. The Supreme Commander knew that supplies were limited and that choices had to be made. He also knew that Patton was not entirely wrong. What Eisenhower said, in essence, was calm and firm. He made it clear that Patton was not to give back anything he had taken. At the same time, he did not reverse the supply decision. Eisenhower told Patton to hold what he had, to stay aggressive where possible, but to accept the limits imposed by logistics. It was a classic Eisenhower answer, reassuring, steady, but final. This response revealed a great deal about Eisenhower's leadership. He did not humiliate Patton. He did not dismiss the concern, but he also did not allow one commander's ambition to override the broader strategy. Eisenhower believed that wars were won by coordination and patience as much as by boldness. Patton, for his part, did not fully agree, but he obeyed. Despite his reputation, Patton understood the chain of command. He pushed where he could, probed German defences, and waited for fuel. When supplies finally resumed, the Third Army surged forward again, proving that Patton's instincts about German weakness were often correct. The pause in late August and early September 1944 allowed the Germans time to recover more than Patton feared. They established defensive positions along the Siegfried Line and around key river crossings. The war in the West did not end quickly. Instead, it dragged on through the fall, culminating in the brutal winter fighting of the Battle of the Bulge in December. Looking back, historians still debate whether Eisenhower should have given Patton more freedom and fuel. Some argue that a concentrated push could have ended the war sooner. Others point out that the Allied supply system simply could not support such an advance, and that a catastrophic overextension was possible. What is clear is that the exchange between Eisenhower and Patton captures the core tension of military command. The balance between aggression and control, between opportunity and risk, between the battlefield commander's instincts and the strategist's responsibility. Patton was a general who lived for movement. He believed that hesitation killed more soldiers than boldness. His entire career, from North Africa to Sicily to France, reinforced that belief. He measured success in miles gained and enemies broken. Eisenhower was a commander shaped by coalition warfare. He had seen how personal rivalries and national pride could tear alliances apart. His strength was not tactical brilliance in the field, but the ability to keep many powerful personalities working toward a common goal. Their relationship was never simple. Eisenhower protected Patton after the slapping incidents in Sicily in 1943 because he knew Patton's value. At the same time, Eisenhower kept Patton on a short leash, aware that his behavior and ambition could cause political trouble. The question about giving it back was Patton being Patton, direct, challenging and rooted in battlefield reality. Eisenhower's answer was Eisenhower being Eisenhower, measured, calm and focused on the long game. As the war continued, both men would face further tests. Patton would drive across Germany in 1945 with renewed speed, proving again his mastery of mobile warfare. Eisenhower would manage the final collapse of Nazi Germany while navigating complex political pressures from Washington, London and Moscow. The moment in late August 1944 stands out because it shows how close the Allies came to a different path, a faster, riskier drive east, or a slower, steadier advance that ultimately succeeded. In military history, moments like this often pass quietly, without dramatic speeches or public attention. But they shape outcomes more than any single battle. A simple question, a measured response, and a war that continued along a chosen path. Patton never stopped believing that speed was the answer. Eisenhower never stopped believing that balance was the key. History shows that the Allied victory required both men, with all their differences. The ground Patton took was not given back. It was held, contested, and eventually expanded. The war moved forward, mile by mile, decision by decision. And somewhere in that vast machinery of war, a question about giving something back revealed the true nature of leadership under pressure. It was not about pride. It was not about ego. It was about responsibility. Eisenhower understood that. Patton challenged it. And together, in tension and trust, they helped bring the war in Europe to an end. The story does not end with that exchange, but it helps us understand why the war unfolded the way it did. It reminds us that victory is not only about bold moves, but about knowing when to push and when to hold. In the end, Eisenhower did not ask Patton to give it back. He asked him to wait. And in that waiting, the course of history was set. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.